okay, now, Mr. Building Owner, you now own all of the wires inside your buildings, and you're responsible for delivering local and long-distance service to the tenants of your buildings. And everybody looked around and went, oh my God, how are we going to do that? Okay? And so we've come an awfully long way in 30 years, 26 really, okay? But those kinds of changes in the speed with which they're going to hit you with mobility are nothing compared to that challenge. And what's interesting is when you talk to the 22 to 24-year-olds, you know, and your thumbs are getting tired because you've got a lot to say to them. I don't know how you guys communicate. I've got an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old. And when the 9-year-old is saying, how come I don't have an iPhone? And then I watch Randy's thing, I'm like, oh, it isn't happening, you know. Thanks, Rocky. Scared the hell out of me, right? So I do think that the challenges start with really kind of soliciting experts. And I think you got to learn a lot. And it's challenging because it's a black box. I get that. It's mobile, it's wireless. You can't really put your arms around it. But some of what we're talking about are more the tangible assets, the physical layer. Amplifiers, antennas, you know, things that you already know a lot about. Fiber, securing internet ports, those kinds of things. And you've solved a lot of those problems, or you're getting ready to solve a lot of those problems. So we just like to piggyback on some of that and maybe make your mobile devices also more secure. That's it.
Anyone else want to add? All right. Mike, next question directed to you. Obviously, security breaches are in the news today. Clearly, the WikiLeaks, and we're talking about it a lot. So as you know, mobile devices become more powerful and become more like laptops, I believe Paul said, or you had said, are we going to see, you know, greater types and more severe types of security breaches on mobile devices?
Yes, is the answer to that. And we're in a lot of agreement on this side. I will say that in watching the botnets operate, we see that one of the things that is often done once a machine is compromised is a little test. You'll see what version of the OS it's running, its upload, download speed. It'll check, see if it's got more than one processor. And if those things are all big numbers, you know, a lot of CPU power, a lot of bandwidth, that's given a special place in the bot army because it can do more work. Well, these mobile devices, as they transition from the one with the belt clip to the ones that we have now, are getting a lot more power. They're getting a lot more bandwidth. We've got LTE coming. So it's absolutely the case that we're going to see intense interest in compromising these devices and finding ways to make money off of the owner of the device or use that device to do other things to make money off of other people. So we know it's coming. I'd like to think that having learned from what's happened to our home computers and our laptops, that we're going to get it better. We're going to do better this time. We're going to get a lot of things right. I can tell you that Ed Amoroso, who I work for, has taken about 1/8 of his people and has done what he calls a pivot. And they're all trying to break mobile devices and figure out, you know, ways that we can not allow the things that have happened to those home computers to happen to those mobile devices. And next year sometime, you know, hopefully we'll have some options where when we send you a bunch of devices, a bunch of smartphones, you have an option that they ship a little differently, have some additional controls on the devices themselves. And also that network-based stuff that I talked about earlier, I mean, we'd like to leverage that and apply filters in the network and put some controls in the network so that those phones won't do things you don't want them to do if you're paying for those and sending them to all your folks out there.
Interesting, thanks. Moving on, another big topic, obviously, that came up, the number one topic, frankly, in research was continuous monitoring. So we heard from Colonel Jones yesterday. We're going to hear from Peter Mell tomorrow. And I know a lot of boardrooms focused on continuous monitoring. Dave, I was wondering, you know, does your solution ease operational requirements for FSMA? Obviously, a lot of folks are looking for the answer. So wondering what's kind of what your answer is to that.
Yes. At the risk of being flippant, we do ease a lot of the operational requirements. A lot of FSMA has been process-based. It's a reporting exercise, and even if you're 100% FSMA compliant, doesn't mean that you're necessarily secure. The new directions in FSMA with single authoritative source of information, continuous compliance, and then automated means of delivering that continuous compliance may seem daunting, but it's actually quite achievable with a proper technology in place. You know, again, at the risk of being flippant, our QRadar system does all of this out of the box, but it is achievable, and it is achievable with a high degree of automation so that there's not a requirement that you devote significant amounts of your staff to do it. Any proper modern tool, once you deploy it, should be able to provide you these capabilities out of the box. So the good news is that it's achievable. The even better news is once you achieve it, you're actually going to be more secure, because it's organized around the top 20 controls that you want to have in place in your architecture. 15 of those controls are designed to be automated, and if you are compliant with the new environment, you actually will be secure rather than an efficient reporting system.
Great. Anyone want to add to that? Sure.
So just real quick, you know, I hear a lot about thinking outside the box. It's a nice little term. I'd like you guys to just challenge yourselves to sort of think a little bit about how could we possibly monitor mobile, cellular phone, and data traffic in our buildings. And you know, if you don't have a solution to that question, maybe come talk to me later.
Awesome. Chris, the next question's for you, and this is kind of about the fact that sprawl has quickly come to the security landscape, you know, in the fight to continuously protect, you know, things like firewall, IDS, IPS, et cetera. So the question that was emailed to me was, what methodologies can be considered in reducing the complexity and cost of these security technologies without reducing or possibly increasing the level of protection, keeping in mind that OMB has put continuous monitoring at the forefront of today's security policy for systems and infrastructure?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I mean, in light of continuous monitoring, I mean, I think there's an angle of sort of garbage in, garbage out. And you can have a great process for gathering that stuff, but if what you're gathering isn't useful, then it's not useful. And I'd suggest that some of the sprawl that you're describing is actually in that category. And the problem that we have is, at some point, there's this debate about defense in depth in terms of number of controls versus it's actually kind of almost like a more is less problem. The more stuff you have in terms of controls, the greater the likelihood that you're going to have dropouts or potholes in those controls. Essentially, if you've got a dozen devices doing network security, where does policy live? And what would that look like if you could construct something like that? So, you know, and you had an interesting question, I think, addressed to one of my fellow panelists up here about the idea of integrating, and I think it was to Michael, integrating things like firewall and intrusion prevention and DLP. And you know, the interesting thing about that is integrating it for integration's sake is pretty much useless and going to generate a lot of performance problems. If you start to break down this idea of, okay, I'm going to have some defense in depth, but I also want to reduce some of the complexity, and you start to focus on relevant controls, i.e. things like users, applications, content, and then augment that with other defense in depth kinds of technologies, then it starts to make a bit more sense. In other words, what I'm trying to sort of cumbersomely say here is get this idea of get some meaningful controls in place, roll that stuff up to the kind of functionality you're talking about, and then augment where you need to with additional controls that can provide some more context to that information.
I would agree with that.
Wonderful. The last few topics, we only have about 3 or 4 more questions. These are all emails actually from council members when I reached out to them to ask kind of some thoughts on some various things. So keeping in mind the overall theme of today's government security challenges. This next question is about emerging technology.